Emotional content is filmed on Whadjuk Noongar land. This podcast acknowledges the traditional owners and custodians of country. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Come for the stories, stay for the connection. I'm your host, Amy Jane Brand, and this is your weekly dose of emotional content. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Emotional Content. I am looking forward to sitting down and having this little chat with you guys. It's something that I feel like, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, I have what I would say a little bit of experience in. Today's episode is about relationships and how to navigate conflict. And I don't think this will only apply to relationships. It can also be within family, friends, any sort of relationship that you have with a loved one, somebody that you care about. Dealing with conflict can be pretty difficult, and navigating your way through that is something that takes time to learn how to do in a healthy way, whether you go to therapy to learn how to cope with it or even doing your own study on it. There's a lot of information out there on different methods, different ways, but I wanted to sit down and talk to you about the things that have best worked for me, and also chat to you about some of the practices that my partner Frank and I do already that we find really works and has helped us a lot along the way. Communication within a relationship, I would have to say, is one of the most important things, if not the most important. It develops trust between you. It creates a stronger bond. It gives you the faith that you can both get through anything that life throws at you as a couple, individually, whatever it is. Communication is the one thing that will help you navigate through whatever comes your way. So getting good at that and learning how to be a strong communicator, even as an individual, is something that will benefit you so much in your life. And it's not the easiest thing. We're not necessarily taught how to communicate the best as children. We go through traumas when we're younger, into our adult years. There's all kinds of reasons as to why communication can be really difficult, especially when it comes to navigating through conflict. And conflict is something that is going to show up fairly regularly in your life in different ways. There's different layers to it in different situations. But the one thing that I can say is a healthy amount of conflict is normal when it comes to relationship. If you're having absolutely no conflict in your relationship whatsoever, even within a difference of opinion, I don't know how healthy that would be. I have heard people say it. There's a specific influencer that actually comes to mind recently that was saying they had absolutely no conflict within their relationship, which at the time when it was being said, I found quite fascinating, because I've always known that a level of conflict within any sort of relationship is to a degree necessary, because there's certain things that are going to come up in life that you don't agree on, and you really need to, navigate your way through that. And if you're constantly agreeing on things, I don't know if that helps you grow as a person. So when people say they've got absolutely no conflict within their relationship, it kind of sounds like a bit of a red flag to me, but that's just my personal opinion. So being in relationships for majority of my life has obviously taught me some things, and I am somebody that has always worn their heart on their sleeve, whether it has led me to heartbreak, which it has many times, or not. I have definitely gone through the ringer when it comes to relationships. So this episode is going to consist of me sharing my experiences, the things that I have learned, and also different techniques that I have used and applied successfully from couples therapy with a psychologist, and also the coaching that I did when I first got back to Perth. And this is also something that I see quite frequently show up within my question boxes when I get you guys to write things in. There's a lot of different layers of conflict that come through, and I feel really passionately when it comes to this subject. It's something that I really enjoy talking about. I like helping people figure out their problems within relationship as well, because I know how difficult it is. And relationships, in my opinion, are not supposed to be easy. Great things do not come easy. So they do take a lot of work. They take a lot of patience, and they make you grow as a person. So whether it works out or not, I think every single relationship has something that we can learn from. Before getting started into the episode, one thing I would absolutely love is to hear your thoughts on what has been the biggest game changer for you when navigating conflict in relationship. What is something that has worked so well for you? I would love to hear about it. So please let me know in the comments. So without further ado, let's get straight into the episode. Looking back, I used to handle conflict very differently. And obviously, this podcast is all about me being extremely transparent and obviously any of my guests coming on here as well. So I'm going to dive straight into some of the things that I used to do during conflict, in arguments, when I was triggered, some of the unhealthy things that I did. And keep in mind, when you're thinking about the things that you do within conflict, in relationship, in friendship, whatever it is, a lot of these reactions and triggers were developed over different traumas previously. So try not to be too hard on yourself. I'm quite comfortable with saying that I wasn't the best during conflict, but it can be something that's a little bit of a bitter pill to swallow when thinking about yourself and how you handle conflict, used to handle conflict, or how you do it now. It's always something that can be worked on. So yeah, don't be too hard on yourself. So one thing that I always wanted to do was sort out the issue or the conflict immediately. I didn't want any space taken. I wanted to sit down and talk about it there and then. I wanted to figure out the problem, sort it out immediately. And I used to get really offended and hurt if this person wanted space. I was definitely better at doing it within friendship, but when it comes to relationships, I wanted to sort out the problem there and then. I really hated it when they would walk away from me. I think usually because it was done quite dismissively. And I will talk you through a really effective way of creating space and giving a bit of time during conflict. But back when I was in previous relationships, I absolutely fucking hated it. I think a lot of women do prefer to just sit down and talk it out over men. I haven't really met that many men that want to sit and discuss it and figure it out there and then on the spot naturally. They usually want to walk away and have a think about things. And I just personally hated that. I think it stems from a place of feeling like I was being abandoned or my feelings weren't being validated. And I wonder if any of you are the same in feeling that way. It's pretty unhealthy on my behalf, not letting the other person have some space and then getting really triggered and angry by them wanting that space. So that's me starting off being brutally honest. I got triggered and offended very easily. I feel like this stems from the fact that in previous relationships, I didn't necessarily feel that there was a secure attachment. There was stuff going on behind my back and little things could be said and I would just immediately take major offense to it. Fuck, this one. Okay, this one is quite difficult and I think a lot of people do it. Using the wrong language when you are trying to express your feelings during conflict is a very typical error that a lot of us make, and it naturally makes the other person get quite defensive. So it becomes very difficult to navigate through that conflict and have an open discussion when you're using the language such as, you did this, you did that, instead of reframing it differently, which I'll talk about later. But I was very much pointing the finger, you did this, you made me feel this way, you that, you this. The constant blaming creates defensiveness and everybody naturally will probably feel that way. Language within discussion and navigating conflict is actually really important and it will completely change the dynamic of that conflict very quickly depending on what language you're using. I've always been very argumentative in conflict and I've pretty much had an answer for everything. The gift of the gab from my father, apparently. I really do usually have an answer for everything, and that's me being really honest. But it's not the best thing to be sarcastic and have an answer for everything when you're trying to navigate through any sort of argument. It doesn't really get you anywhere. So I didn't really have the ability to be like, okay, I'm going to just apologize for this and apologize for the way that I've hurt them. It was very much me versus them rather than us versus the problem. And that's one of the other dot points I have here, is how important it is to really understand that when you're in relationship and you're both working towards the same goal, you are looking at it as it's us versus the problem, not you versus them. Because when you are in that you versus them competitive to win the argument, that kind of bullshit, you are literally going to get nowhere. But it is something that a lot of us end up doing naturally when we start relationships, especially when you don't have that much experience. It does feel like you versus them. It's often not something you're taught by your parents. The boomer generation weren't the best at teaching us things like that. You might have really excellent parents that did learn those things when they were younger, but if you are a millennial like myself or even a Gen Z, you probably are going to have parents that hadn't fully learnt how to communicate the best themselves yet. So we tend to be the generation that is breaking that generational trauma. So it's a different generation and it's something that we have to learn ourselves now. This next one I find kind of funny because I think so many women are going to understand it, but I would hold on to things for eternity. Like, I would know the date, time, the weather of when a specific event happened, and I would bring that motherfucker up at any chance I had. So I basically had a library of things that traumatized me or I wasn't happy with, that upset me, pissed me off, that was never fully resolved, and I would bring that shit right back up. It was something that I really struggled with, letting things go and not being able to move past it when we had agreed to. This last one is still quite triggering for me, and I think it would trigger a lot of people, but I do handle it differently now. However, it does still really fire me up. So my last point here is any gaslighting would make me really explosive. So I would start shouting, I'd start kicking off, I'd start swearing, I'd get really quite aggressive with my tone of voice. I would be really angry with the gaslighting because it does make me feel like I'm going insane. And I think so many of you listening are probably nodding your head and agreeing with me at how fucking triggering being gaslit actually is. And it's a huge, huge form of manipulation. So now I communicate much healthier these days. I've come leaps and bounds from what I used to be like. But one thing I do want to say is this definitely stems down to now feeling secure in my relationship, and having a secure attachment definitely gives you the space to grow into being a better person. If you're not being gaslit all the time and you're not going through the things that are super triggering all the time, you are able to drop into being more relaxed and feeling more safe. I do like to say that you drop into your feminine energy. There are some people out there that really don't like the terms masculine and feminine when it comes to talking about that. But I do think it is a case of me personally dropping into my feminine and feeling like I can, let go of the reins and feel safe in that regard. And that very much so has given me the ability to now be a better communicator. So developing skills like this, in my opinion, does require to feel some sort of safety and trust within relationship. Now I have so much more patience. Oh my gosh, I did not have much patience before, and I did have a very short fuse. It's something that I, watched over time when I was younger. It's something I developed from there as well, going into relationships fairly young, and then just constantly being in them. It's something that's taken a long time for me to learn, but I can safely say that I have so much more patience now. Shouting, slamming doors, swearing, being aggressive, getting upset, it only ever really elevates the situation. And it is probably a big thing for people with ADHD, like myself as well. Going back to things I picked up from when I was younger, I also do need to factor in the ADHD. It is something that can be controlled within ADHD. It just takes a lot of work. Feeling dysregulated and having impulsive reactions to things that I used to do, which was shouting, slamming doors, just being quite explosive in general when I was really heightened and unable to regulate my nervous system, and I didn't even really know what that was at the time. Thankfully, it's something that I very rarely do anymore. And it's actually down to me realizing how unwell I would feel after a really big spike in cortisol from getting so upset. I can actually feel it in my body for like 24 hours after. And I don't know if any of you are the same, but when you get really upset about things, crying, screaming, shouting, those really, really big elevated fights, how you feel afterwards, and you've just got all that adrenaline running through your body, all that cortisol's risen up. It just feels horrendous. And I am very sensitive to how I feel within my body. And it's a feeling that I really don't like, and it does not benefit me in any way. So thinking about how that affects me, not just the other person, it really puts me off from letting myself get that elevated. And half the time the other person isn't even listening to you. When I've gotten that angry, the other person's just checked out, and rightly so, because it's just, who's going to seriously listen to you screaming and shouting like that? It's just not constructive. I know there's times where that is going to happen because someone's going to trigger the shit out of you. I'm definitely not saying that I won't do that again in my life, but it's not something that I revert to immediately like I used to. I put a question in here for myself that I had to think about overnight last night, and it is, what's one hard lesson that you have had to learn about love? Now, there's definitely been many, but the one that has always stood out the most for me is, if your partner is not matching you or meeting you halfway in the amount of effort that you're putting into that relationship, I don't believe that it will stand the test of time. And actions speak so much louder than words. I know that one sounds like a bit of a cliche. You hear that all the time, but it is so true. Being with someone previously that did nothing but talk like they were going to be better or improve on things and never show up with that in their actions was a painful loop to be in. And I believe that's what made me so anxious in my attachment within that relationship. It created so much distrust and uncertainty. You can just never believe someone for their word. Like, actions is everything. It really is everything. I can actually believe Frank when he says he's going to do something or he's going to work on something. That man shows up. And it also gives some room for people's mistakes because you can see that they're trying. And that's so different to dating somebody who is talking like they're going to make the changes, never actions what they said they're going to do, never shows up, and then continues to make the same mistakes. And people are going to make mistakes. There's never going to be a perfect human. But when you're both working towards that same goal, there is room for error. And there's room for error where you still trust them. That's what I believe that I have learned the most when it comes to love. They need to be as invested in making that relationship work and putting in the effort the same as you, or it's not going to stand the test of time. So what actually works when navigating through conflict? Well, I'm going to tell you some of my best tips. And these things are what myself and Frank practice during any form of conflict, and we really stick to these things, and it has helped us so much. I really believe that there is so much value in the things that I'm about to tell you. I sat down and I really put pen to paper on this one to give you the best advice that I could. So I hope you find some value in any of these points because honestly, they have worked for us so much. So number one is pause before reacting. When emotions are high, the best advice I can give is to pause before responding. Reacting straight away and moving on impulse, moving on heightened emotions usually doesn't end well and can escalate things very quickly. So earlier in the episode, I said I was going to tell you how to take space from each other in a graceful way. Well, this is something that was recommended to us by our psychologist who we see. We get couples therapy, I would say when she can fit us in, at least once a month. I would actually have to say that if you're both really invested in the relationship and you have the means to, because obviously therapy is an investment, I would highly suggest doing some couples therapy sessions together earlier on in the relationship. So before things actually feel like they're getting bad and you might need that support, it gives you an opportunity to figure out how you both communicate, how you both perceive things. It really gives you an opportunity to not only understand yourselves better, but understand each other and what you may have been through before this relationship. You have somebody there to mediate you through things that could be a challenge moving forward in that relationship. So I think therapy early on in a relationship is extremely beneficial, but this is something that she told us to do. And since implementing it, it has made such a difference when it comes to avoiding saying things that make it more difficult to repair from. So it is called the graceful exit, and I feel very passionately about this because it's been fucking awesome. So the graceful exit is a way of taking space with kindness. It's actually a little plan that you create together, which makes it quite nice as well. So firstly, you have to choose how long you are allowed to have that exit for. So if one of you needs to take a graceful exit, what is the time limit on that? We chose up to 3 hours. That's the cutoff limit. We've never actually had to use it all the way up until 3 hours. And I think when you do the graceful exit, you actually self-regulate a lot quicker because it's been done with kindness. It's really bizarre. Like if you've had a raging argument and then you both part ways, and it can fucking linger on for days, especially if you're an avoidant attachment, that shit can go on for a really long time. But since implementing this, I think we've taken like an hour max, but 3 hours is the cutoff for us, right? So first off, how long to take the exit for? Okay. Secondly, no texting. It's meant to be a form of no communication. That is your graceful exit. So that's a big rule. But you can also add some little rules in yourselves. If there's something that you guys tend to do that you would consider not very constructive during conflict, add that into here as one of the rules. Something that Frank and I were quite guilty of doing is when we weren't face to face, we would start texting each other, and it would just be a really awful form of communication. Texting during conflict is a big no-no because you can't see where somebody's coming from, and things can be taken very, very differently to how they're actually being said. So texting is a big no-no during conflict, and I think a lot of people are guilty of that, something that we were particularly guilty of pretty heavily. So that's a rule for us. So we've got how long to exit for, no texting, and any other rules that best work for you both. This is the really important part of when you're exiting. So when you exit, it needs to be done with kindness. It needs to be announced in a kind way. You don't say, I'm taking a graceful fucking exit, like, fuck you. Like, it's got to be done calmly, and you have to pretty much teach yourself, if this is difficult for you, hey, I'm going to take my exit. If you want to say graceful exit, whatever, you can say, I'm going to take my exit. I need some time. I just want to go and regulate myself. I'm not abandoning you. However you want to say it, even if it's just a case of I'm taking a graceful exit now, closing the door gently, do it smiling. Our psychologist said to smile when you do it, I think because it physically softens the situation. It's doing it with kindness. It's a graceful exit. It's all about keeping calm, announcing what you're doing. And with these rules, I think for myself especially, when a graceful exit is being implemented, because those rules are there and we have successfully stuck to those rules, it builds trust that one, I'm not being abandoned, and two, I'm not having my feelings invalidated. And I know that we are going to come back and talk about it, because more often than not, it's Frank that prefers to take that time away. And I feel like as a straight woman in straight relationships, I have found a lot of men do like to walk away and think about things. And I usually just want to sort it out there and then. So the graceful exit has been awesome for me because I don't feel like I'm being invalidated. I don't feel like I'm being walked away from. It really saves me from feeling like shit when the other person needs space. And it's been really beneficial for me too, to actually take a breather, collect myself. And during those graceful exits, the main goal is to get yourself regulated and bring you back down to a calm baseline. Once you're feeling regulated and ready to talk, you both meet up with each other again, whether it's in the lounge room, whatever, if you're living together, however you want to do it, coming back together before or within that time frame that was agreed upon, and attempting to talk from a better headspace. Now, if things get elevated again, it's a case of doing the graceful exit again. It becomes second nature after a while. It's something that has really worked for us. And I feel like the graceful exit is something that could work for anybody. It avoids saying hurtful things that you don't mean, and it makes the recovery quicker from that conflict if you're not saying nasty shit. So the graceful exit is awesome because it gives one person who might need the space the opportunity to calm down and get regulated, and the other person has the security of knowing they're not being ignored or abandoned with their feelings. So the agreement essentially creates trust and it builds the bond stronger between you both. It's something that has been an absolute game changer for us. Number 2, I spoke about quite a bit before, but it is you versus the problem, not you versus them. This is a huge one. It's going to take time to remind yourself of that constantly. But if you are both putting in the work and you have a conversation around this and constantly come back to this is us versus the problem, it will be so beneficial for you both. It's not about winning the argument. It's about figuring out and navigating the problem together. It's about sitting down and listening to each other's different opinions and respecting that. And it's really about shifting your mindset from having to win the argument to understanding each other better. That's really what it comes down to, and it's so important. It's really about just reminding yourself, we're a team, and how can we fix this problem together? Just repeat that in your head. Both of you, not just you. Tell them, discuss this with them, and constantly remind yourselves of that. If you have to, write it on the fridge, put it on a sticky note somewhere important and point at it and look at it. Remind yourselves that you guys are in this together and you've just got to figure it out together. You're not against each other. Number 3, get curious, not defensive. So this is a big one. If your partner is upset, I suggest try asking some questions to understand why they're upset before reacting to the things they're saying. Just take a moment of pause and ask them, can you help me understand why you're feeling this way? That's a really good open question that puts their defenses down and gets them talking. Asking soft questions like that will get you to the problem, thus the solution sooner. What do you need from me right now? How can I best support you in this moment? These things said, especially to women, like if that's said to me, I immediately kind of drop my guard and start talking openly. If somebody says to me like, how can I best support you in this moment? It's just a really nice thing to hear when you're upset, and it makes you open up instead of close off. So they are definitely things to try when it comes to your partner being upset and you want to know what's going on. Just ask. Something that I was taught by my life coach when I was 30 during conflict was to imagine your partner as their inner child, so as their child self. And how would you actually speak to a child? You would speak to them with softness and kindness, and you would understand that they're upset right now and they're trying to communicate that. It's a skill that takes time, that one, especially when you're really elevated and pissed off. And it's something that you both need to do. Not just one person. It can get pretty exhausting if you're constantly trying to come in with that softness and they're just, kicking off and not trying to put in the work as well. Like, this takes 2 people to tango. You need to see the other person trying as well. And as I said, it takes time. But one thing that I also saw that is relevant to being taught that on TikTok was a video of a guy who had implemented the idea, which is something I really want to do with Frank, that they have those little fold out photo frames where it's just got 2 photos in it and it can be like a little book almost. It was like a metal silver one. Anyway, it was a photo of his partner as a child and him as a child. And when arguments, conflict get really elevated, things are escalating, one of them brings out that little photo album and they put it in front of them. And not only do you get reminded about their younger self and their child wounds, but you also get reminded of your own. And it makes you think about where you're reacting from. Because when you are in conflict with somebody, especially a partner, family, friends, when you're trying to navigate through conflict, you're actually speaking to their child self, because those child wounds show up when we're elevated as adults. And it takes a really fucking long time to work through that shit. Even some of my coaches, even my psychologist have all admitted that they still feel themselves revert back to that wounded child. And it takes so long to work on that. I don't think it's something that ever fully goes away, personally. If you can understand that you're talking from that space when you're elevated and your partner is talking from that space when they're hurt and elevated, it gives you so much more understanding and it gives you the ability to see past what they're actually saying. Because half the time, what they're saying might not always be the exact problem and it could be coming from something else. So it gives you the ability to see deeper and be softer. Number 4 is use I statements instead of you, which results in blame. We've touched on this lightly already, and I know it's a really difficult one because I still struggle with this sometimes. If I'm being completely honest, I'm not perfect when it comes to navigating conflict. there's things that still show up for me, and I very much have to catch myself from using this type of language. So for instance, using the language, you never listen to me, which results in blame and it triggers defensiveness. It kind of gets you nowhere using that language. You never listen to me, you do this, you do that. Instead of that, you can reword it by saying, I feel unheard when I try to talk to you about this. Oh my God, something just came to my head. I probably shouldn't say it, but immediately that fucking song, I Feel Broke, just came to my phone. Oh my God. Guys, I don't know if I should even put that in there, but it does. I feel unheard when I try to talk to you about this. All I can hear is that fucking song. Stop right now. Anyway, I feel unheard when I try to talk about this, expresses feelings and invites discussion. So it's a lot more open than the closed off blaming. That's where I was trying to go with that one. So another thing that the psychologist recommended, which is really fucking awesome. I never really thought about this. I'd never done it before. I'd never heard of somebody doing it before, but it makes a lot of sense. To put this simply, we see the world through all different lenses. We all have different filters. We perceive and interpret things differently to each other, all looking at the same thing, right? Now, when it comes to the filters that we have, they are developed in childhood and they come from traumatic experiences. It can happen as an adult as well, but they often start from childhood and they're actually called schemas. I won't go into too much detail about it because it's going to be a little bit too heavy on the psychologist front, but they're how we see things and they are beliefs that we have about ourselves that we've developed over time. Now, a lot of the time, these schemas during conflict make us perceive what people are saying very differently, and we take it as things like criticism when it probably isn't necessarily. The best way to combat this is actually by sitting down and doing it without being sarcastic or condescending, but having the agreement to sit down and say, hey, I'm just going to repeat back what you've said to me to make sure that I'm receiving it correctly, or I'm receiving it how you're saying it. Because we're often not receiving what's being said in the way that they mean it when it comes to conflict. So it's a really interesting, simple way of implementing a practice that makes sure you're both understanding each other better. Number 5, ask yourself, is this about something deeper? We touched on this before. Often fights aren't actually about what they seem. Are you actually mad about this? Or is there an underlying fear, insecurity, or pattern showing up for you? Digging deeper and getting curious can find the real issue underlying. Something Frank and I were taught in coaching was to do a weekly check-in, and we've implemented that as much as possible each week. Sometimes we forget to do it, but more often than not, we always like to do this. So this can be implemented with anybody really, even your friendships. If you're living together in close proximity with people, not just relationship, this can be super helpful. So the weekly check-in is a time where you're both relaxed and you've allocated a space to have a conversation about things that we struggled with in our personal lives, within the relationship, things that have been a really big positive, wins for the week. It's an opportunity to literally just have a check-in with each other and ourselves. And you can add whatever questions you would like into it. These are really great for relationships because you know that once a week, if you stick to the check-ins, you know that there is a safe time for you to bring up something that might be bothering you, or it gives you an opportunity to really show your appreciation for the things that they've been doing, or, you know, some encouragement for them working on the relationship with you. Whatever it is, you've allocated some time and you know that you've got that at the end of the week. So you can bring up the things that you want to in an environment that's safe and allocated specifically just for that. So it's a really nice time for you both to just chill out and have a conversation that shouldn't really get elevated, hopefully. So the weekly check-ins, you can put in whatever questions you like, but we personally have biggest win for the week in personal and relationship. So I would ask Frank, what's your biggest win for the week for yourself? And what's the biggest win for the week for us? So it could be as simple as something going great for him at work. And then for us, it was we managed to exercise together so many times a week, whatever. That was a win for us. The next one is something your partner did that you loved. So I would ask Frank, what's something that I did this week that you really appreciated or you really loved? And then that gives them a chance to tell you how you've been filling up their cup. It's just some warm and fuzzies that really help the relationship. Something that your partner did that bothered you. So I would say to Frank, what is something this week that I could improve on, or something that bothered you that you would like to discuss? Gives you the opportunity to have a conversation about it without it getting elevated. And then the next one that we have on there is what would make next week great for your personal life and relationship. So that's the weekly check-in. I highly suggest doing it. If there is something out of this that I could suggest doing straight away, it would be the weekly check-ins, because that's something that we learned from coaching, and we did that quite early on in the relationship and have continued doing it ever since. Learning each other's love languages and attachment styles has been a game changer for us as well. It's not something that I even did in previous relationships, but I have definitely implemented that with Frank, and we have really benefited from that. I ended up doing that really early on in the relationship too, because we both had different attachment styles, and you often will when you first get into a relationship as well. My attachment style has actually changed because, like I said before, I was feeling very anxious in my attachment style in previous relationships. And I don't think people realize that it can actually change within each relationship that you're in as well. So it's really good to do those tests and figure out where you're both at, and gives you an idea of what to work on as well. I think learning those type of things is not only beneficial for you as a relationship, but as individuals too. I watched mine change over time into secure. So being able to say that now is a huge achievement in itself, because I was very much showing up as an anxious attachment style previously. Number 6, repair is more important than being right. Yeah, that's pretty self-explanatory. Even if you don't agree 100%, learning to apologize for the part you played in the argument or the conflict, something as simple as, I see how I hurt you and I'm sorry, will completely change the whole energy. It's a skill that not everybody has, but I think it's a part of maturing, and again, looking at the bigger picture, that it is about you both versus the problem, not versus each other. Don't bring up the past just to win the argument. Yeah, obviously I was very guilty of that. From personal experience, I think this is only possible when your partner is showing that they're putting the effort into the relationship. If they are showing up and they're really trying and they're meeting you halfway and you can see them putting in the effort, it is so much easier for you to let go of past mistakes because you can see them trying. When they're not putting in the effort, you're going to probably be bringing up the past because you're not seeing them make any changes. So I think that one is very much dependent on how much effort they're putting in as well. Number 8 is recognize when to let go. This isn't what everybody wants to hear, but if you keep having fights about the same things with absolutely no resolution, it might be time to ask yourself, is this fixable, or are you fundamentally too different in what each other needs? It's a hard question to ask yourselves. This is something I would definitely ask if they weren't putting in that effort and working with you to make the relationship work. If they are half-arsing it, and you're still having the same arguments, there's no resolution, it would definitely be time to ask yourself if this is right for you. I had to put this in here because I stayed in relationships for a lot longer than I should have, and I should have had this conversation with myself a lot sooner than I did. There is obviously a point where relationships need to end. We often stay in things longer than we should have to really learn those lessons, I guess. But if you can have a really open discussion with each other, if you feel like you're fundamentally just both needing two totally different things, then it would be really healthy to do that. If you're both really fighting to make it work and you're just going through a really rough time right now, but you both love each other deeply and want to make things work and you're both putting in that effort, it's a totally different story. I guess it's a case of, are you fighting for the relationship or are you fighting just not to lose? So yeah, that's a big question to ask yourselves. From my experience, long-lasting, beautifully bonded relationships take a lot of work. People are out looking for their perfect person with all of these credentials, and I don't think they understand that the right person is the one that wants to make it work with you. It's not a case of them fitting this long list of prerequisites that they need to have. It's finding somebody that respects you, that loves you, and that wants to make it work. That is your person. I don't believe that the grass is always greener on the other side. If you have somebody that is willing to ride the storm with you, loves you, and wants to work things through with you, then that is the right person. So on that note, just remember, conflict is inevitable, but how you handle it determines whether it makes or breaks your relationship. I really hope that this episode was able to help you. This is years of stuff that I have figured out works for me, and I swear by it. I will make sure to update you guys with any other tools and tips that I figure out along the way that help too. But on that note, please leave a comment and let me know, like I said before, what is a game changer for you when it comes to navigating arguments? I would love to hear it, and I'm so open to learning more from you guys as well. I love you all so much. I appreciate you. Thank you for listening. And just remember that you are so loved and you deserve to be with somebody that puts in as much effort as you do. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, please give it a share. You never know who might need a little emotional content in their life. For daily feel-good posts, follow @_emotional content on Instagram and TikTok. And don't forget to hit that follow button so you're notified every time a new episode drops. Your support means the absolute world to me.